Question: is it that the no-self folks are suffering a form of psychological dissociation, possibly? I'm asking the channel owner, not the audience. Good God, I don't want to hear anything from a bunch of neo-advaita robots or pie-eyed guru worshippers. I don't give a shit what Rupert Spira, Mooji, Ramana Maharshi, Papaji, Adyashanti or Tony Parsons says. Been there, annoyed by that. No self, false self, nothing but self. I've heard them all. Maybe this guy has a different perspective. Well, I do have a different perspective, but it will take me a little while to unravel my perspective. So I think actually the questioner is on the right track. Obviously, the person has spent time with these non-dual teachers. And so he or she has an advantage over me because I haven't met them personally, so I have no personal agenda, and obviously I can't comment on a specific person, whether that person is in dissociation or not. But I can comment on the general phenomenon, because what I have observed in this entire non-dual culture is that there is a certain dissociation from reality. Now, I know very well that some of these teachers would say, no, we are not dissociating from reality, because what most people see is not reality, it's a complete illusion. We are actually seeing reality. And so how do we deal with this? How do we explain this? And the way I would start by talking about this topic, because it's obviously a very important topic. It goes really to the heart of what philosophers and theologians and thinkers have been debating for thousands of years. You know, what is real? What is not real? And how do we know? So I have in several of my videos, I've talked about the fact that the material universe, especially on planet Earth, can be compared to a reality simulator. And this, of course, is a much more sophisticated simulator than anything we humans have built here on Earth. You can go into this specially designed room that looks like an airplane cockpit, and you can think you're sitting in an actual airplane and you're flying. Or you can put on virtual reality goggles and think you're in some different world. And it can feel very real, but obviously you knew that you went in there or you put the goggles on. So you remember that you weren't always in this world, and therefore you know this is not the real world, as we call it. So the problem is that planet Earth is a completely immersive reality simulator, where the process of coming into a physical body, integrating with a physical body, is so complex that we generally forget that there's anything outside the simulator. We think this is it. I mean, this is the real world. So what I explain in my videos is that the purpose of the reality simulator of Earth is to give us any experience we can imagine, to make that experience seem real, and to give us that experience for as long as we want. Because contrary to many of the non-dual teachers, I obviously teach that we have free will. So that's why we, once we are in the reality simulator, we can choose to create any experience we want and think it's real. So you look at the entire discussion that people have had for thousands of years. What's real, what's unreal. And you can see how people have been going back and forth, and they have made claims and counterclaims that they come up with proof. And we, of course, who grew up in the modern world, we were exposed to, on the one side, a religion. For many of us, it was Christianity, but of course, many other religions make the same claim that they are presenting a worldview. But it's not a worldview, it's reality. This is how the world is because our scriptures say so. On the other hand, we have scientific materialism who presents a very different worldview, and they're also saying this is not a worldview, this is how reality is because science says so. Now, I've tried to say that scientific materialism isn't the same as science. So we can't really say that science has validated the worldview presented by materialism, just as we can't say that God has validated the worldview presented by official Christianity. So anyway, the question is, what's real and what's unreal? And the way I approach this, after many, many years of going through different blind alleys, is that we have to ask ourselves a simple question. Is there anything that's real? Is there anything that's real? Just think about this. And I know some of the non-dual teachers will say, either they'll say, no, nothing is real, or nothing we can experience is real. Or they'll say, the good old Eastern saying, only Brahman is real, the world is an illusion. In other words, as I explained in my non-duality videos, there is a reality that is undifferentiated, but as soon as we have differentiation into different forms, we have a duality and it's all an illusion. This is what some of the non-dual teachers would say. And I'm saying that this is not an adequate view. It's simply too superficial. So the way I look at it is that when you have the idea, just the concept, that the world is a reality simulator, you can ask yourself a different question. You can ask yourself, where did the reality simulator come from? You can't really deny that we are conscious beings and that we are having an experience. This goes back to Descartes, French philosopher, who said, I think, therefore I am. In other words, the fact that I'm conscious proves that I exist, and that was the only thing he couldn't doubt. So, of course, other people have doubted because you can doubt anything. So, before we answer the question, I think we need to do what most people don't do, whether non-dualists or philosophers. We need to look at the mind and ask ourselves, do our minds have certain limitations? And I have a video in my series about how the world works where I talk about how the mind can deceive itself. And what I'm saying in there is basically that the mind can prove anything to its own satisfaction. In other words, the non-dualists, they are really just coming up with another worldview that's different from Christianity or scientific materialism. And they, of course, claim that their worldview is real. This is real. The others are not real, but ours is real. And you look throughout history and how many people have done the same. So, when we look at this, we can say, but this can be explained when we realize that it's a reality simulator we are in. Because the purpose of the reality simulator, it's an interactive environment. It's not that you look at all the 8 billion people on Earth. It's not that they're having the same experience, right? But most of them believe their experience is real. So this is the feature of our minds, that our minds can interact with a reality simulator. And we are projecting subconsciously, with the subconscious mind, as I explain in a number of my videos, we are projecting a certain worldview into the reality simulator. And within very wide boundaries, the reality simulator will give back to us what seems to be physical circumstances that conform to our worldview. In other words, it seems like within certain boundaries, we are able to create our own reality, so to speak. But as I also explained, the sense of reality is in our own minds. It's in our own minds. Because, as I've explained in several videos, we use the duality consciousness, where you can take any relative viewpoint, you can elevate it to the status of being absolute, and therefore you think this is real. This I don't need to question, because that is how it is. And when I look at these non-dual teachers, they're doing the same thing. They're just creating a worldview, and they're projecting with their minds, this is real. You know, as one non-dual teacher says in a video that basically, I'm paraphrasing, but the consequence of what he's saying is that when his body dies, he ceases to exist because he goes back into infinite awareness. So there is nothing that carries over to a potential future lifetime or has any kind of individual awareness after, because in his worldview, there's only the separate self and infinite awareness, and the separate self is an illusion. Okay, so what I'm saying is, if we ask ourselves, where did the reality simulator come from? We can realize, or we can at least ask ourselves the question. We can see that we are in an interactive environment that responds to our consciousness. In other words, whatever we project out, we can be absolutely convinced that it's real. In other words, almost any experience we want, we can have here. And many different people are having different experiences. And they all feel it's real. So we can have an experience, we have a sense of reality. But did our minds create the reality simulator? We can see that inside the reality simulator, our minds can create, both individually and collectively, almost any experience we can imagine. And the mind can project the view that this is not an experience, this is real, this is how the world really is. But did our minds also create the reality simulator? And that's where I'm saying that in my mind, after many years of deliberations and contemplation and mystical experiences, it's clear to me that no, we didn't create the reality simulator. We created the current contents of the reality simulator within certain parameters that were defined. But we, humankind, didn't create the reality simulator itself. So now we have a new consideration that you don't really find anywhere else. And that is that what is real and unreal? Nothing inside the reality simulator, nothing we can experience inside the reality simulator is real. But the reality simulator is real. In other words, there is a reality outside our simulated experience. And that gives us at least a starting point, because what you see is that you have, as I said, all of these philosophers who have debated what's real and unreal. And a number of these philosophers, not just the neo-advaitans, not just the non-dualists or the radical non-dualists, but a number of them have come to a point where they started doubting that anything is real. Nothing is real, is what their conclusion is. And quite frankly, when you get to that point where you and your mind think nothing is real, well, the guys with the straitjacket are just right around the corner. Because if you think nothing is real, you can't function psychologically. My only question to such people is, what antidepressants are you taking? Because you can only be depressed if you think there's nothing that's real. I mean, you literally, if you look at human beings, you can identify certain psychological needs we have. I call them psychospiritual needs. And one of them is, we need to know that something is real. And that is, of course, why you see so many people who are clinging to the worldview that they were given by their religion or scientific materialism or communism or whatever it is. But they're clinging to it as if it was a matter of life and death, because psychologically it is a matter of life and death. You have some kind of firm foundation to stand on. So the very radical non-dualists who are basically saying nothing is real, I'm just saying, you know, for most people that's not, it's not functional to even believe that. So what I'm saying is, once we start questioning where did the reality simulator come from, we can say there are two types of experiences. There is a simulated experience and there's reality. In other words, we are inside a simulator. Everything we experience inside the simulator is simulated. But it is possible for us to experience something outside the simulator. And that experience is real compared to the simulation. It may not be the ultimate reality as I've talked about, but it's real compared to the simulation. And so now we can see that throughout the ages, many, many mystics have had these intuitive, mystical experiences. Most spiritual people that I have met in my 48 years on the path have had some of these experiences. I myself have had many of them. And the way I explain this is that I'm saying that outside the reality simulator is what I call the spiritual realm, and our higher selves reside in the spiritual realm. And what we are when we say I, is what I call the conscious you, which is an extension of the higher self, which is sent into physical embodiment on earth. In other words, the spiritual self exists outside the reality simulator, but is sent an extension of itself into the simulator. But because we are an extension of the higher self, we can reconnect to the higher self. And when we do that, we are having an experience that there is something outside the simulator, and we experience that it's more real than what we experience inside the simulator. So this is, as I explained in many of my videos, this is what the spiritual path is all about. We have two basic options as beings inside the simulator. We can see ourselves as separate beings, disconnected. There's nothing outside the simulator. What we are here is all we are. Or we can see ourselves as connected beings. In other words, we are connected to something outside our own minds. And so to me, the essential consideration here is, what is your experience of life? In other words, do you see yourself, experience yourself as a separate being? Or do you have the actual experience that you are connected to something outside your own mind? It doesn't really matter so much how you see that, what you are connected to, whether you have a clear vision or not, because in the beginning, we just have a vague sense of connection. And then, so we don't really know what we're connected to. But the real dramatic question here, essential question is, separate or connected? Because when you experience your connected being, you realize one very simple thing. Your mind is not a complete system. Your mind is not able to define reality. And that's when you can begin to go through the process I describe in many of my videos, where you increase your sense of connection to your higher self, whereas at the same time you are decreasing your sense of identification with what I call the outer mind. So this is the process that we are going through, if you want to describe it in very universal terms about this spiritual growth and the spiritual path, is that we are gradually, and I describe it as we have a number of these subconscious cells we have created in the consciousness of separation, and we take one at a time, we overcome the illusion, we consciously see through the illusion, and then we rise to the next level of the path where there's another illusion, and we keep doing this until we reach the highest level of consciousness we can reach on earth, and then we can permanently exit the reality simulator called terror. We can ascend to the spiritual realm and become permanent beings in the spiritual realm, what I call ascended masters, because we ascend by mastering our own minds. So, what we also see with this model is that the normal experience we're having, and that the vast majority of people on earth are having, this is a simulated experience. And it's created by an interaction between the actual reality simulator that we are in and our own minds. For most people, it's the subconscious mind, but as you walk the spiritual path, you become more and more aware of the subconscious mind. You're sort of uncovering the subconscious mind. So, the vast majority of people on earth are completely immersed, and this is the reality simulator. We can have two basic experiences: immersion, where we think it's a real world, and awakening, where we start awakening from that immersion. So most people are completely immersed, and they think that they are interacting with the real world, and that their experience of reality comes from the fact that this is how the world is. As you begin to connect to your higher self, you realize that the experience you are having and the sense of reality are actually created inside your own mind. You have a perception filter. You are interacting with the real world out there, or not a real world, but a simulated world in the simulator. But the actual experience you're having is created in your own mind. That's why you can have two people who are in very similar physical circumstances, but they have very different inner experiences of it. You can have, for some people the glass is half full, for others it's half empty, just to make it very simple. So you see this, that people's actual experience of life is created by their own minds and how their own minds interact with the simulator. And then the sense of reality that they project on it is also created by their own minds. I've described it in detail in several videos on these subconscious selves. So the spiritual path is about gradually unraveling these subconscious selves, coming to see that they're based on that a self is based on an illusion. When you see the illusion, you also see the higher perspective. You can let the self die. You're not trying to solve a problem, even though the self may present you with a problem. You're just letting the self die. Okay? So what I'm saying is, as we walk this gradual path of raising our consciousness towards higher levels, we are having a clearer and clearer connection to something outside the simulator. And that's why I'm saying what we experience outside the simulator is not a simulated experience. But here's where we have to be really, really careful. And this took me decades to figure this one out, or actually come to the point where I was willing to accept it. Because we can have these genuine mystical experiences when we're at lower states of consciousness. But our outer minds are still so active, and our outer minds are still so attached to the worldview that we have, that the mind, as soon as we are done with the experience, the mind will superimpose an image or an interpretation on the mystical experience. And it will use it to validate our worldview. It will attempt to use the mystical experience to validate our worldview. In other words, inside the simulator, we created a worldview. When we have a mystical experience, we experience something outside the simulator, and the purpose of this is to give us a frame of reference. We've experienced there's something outside our own minds and the worldview created by the minds, and we can use that to question the sense of reality of our worldview and specifics of the worldview, specific illusions of the worldview, but also the sense of reality. So when we do this gradually, we gradually become able to disidentify from the outer mind and increase our connection to the higher self. And that means we are having a clearer and clearer connection to our higher selves. We are interpreting it less and less with the outer mind. We are superimposing things on it less and less with the outer mind. And so, I know this was a long roundabout explanation, but to get back to the question, are the non-dual teachers, the no-self folks, that was what I was looking for, are they experiencing some form of psychological dissociation in the sense that they're disconnected from the real world? And what I would say is that the question is very simple. Are they having a genuine experience of something outside their own minds? Or do they think that their own minds can show them reality? In other words, is what they base their teachings on, is that an experience that is created inside the simulator, or is it an experience from outside the simulator? And I know that probably most of them, if they were presented with this reasoning, they would say, well, of course we are experiencing something outside the simulator because it's outside of form. There is no differentiation. We are experiencing pure awareness. Are you saying Ramana Maharshi didn't have a genuine God realization of something outside the simulator? Or that I'm not having it? This is most likely what they would say. And I would say, well, I don't know that, because I'm not inside your mind. I'm not inside Ramana Maharshi's mind. But what I am saying is this. The consequence of realizing that we are in a reality simulator is that inside the simulator we have the free will, we have the imagination to create any experience we want for ourselves, including the experience of an undifferentiated state of consciousness. And see, this is where, and you'll see this, and if you look at my non-duality videos, I have a whole series of them. If you look at it, you'll see that I'm gradually explaining this in deeper and deeper, from a deeper and deeper perspective. And what I'm basically saying, to simplify it, is that the basic misunderstanding that all of these non-dual teachers are based on, going all the way back to the Vedas, is that only the undifferentiated Brahman is real. And anytime you have differentiation, it's unreal. It's not just about the world, it's also about an individual being is unreal, they will say. So that's why they've come up with this idea that there's only a separate self and undifferentiated awareness, infinite awareness. But what I'm saying is that this overlooks this very fundamental question. Where did the world come from? Because if only Brahman is real, it follows logically that the world came from Brahman. And in fact, Shankara's original quote is, only Brahman is real, the world is an illusion, the world is Brahman. That's the original quote that sometimes they leave out. They just have the first two sentences. So, if only Brahman is real, the world must have been created by Brahman out of its own essence. So the world is not an illusion. The illusion is that the world is separated from Brahman, other than Brahman, different from Brahman. The illusion created by the reality simulator is that we are living in a world that is separated from Brahman, separated from a higher reality. It has some existence of its own. And so when you begin to ask yourself, why was the world created? And that's what I've explained. I have one video that's called How the World Was Created. And it really explains it in detail. So the basic teaching is, there is one being that created our world of form. You can call it Brahman, you can call it God, you can call it the Creator. I prefer to say Creator because it's more neutral. It isn't associated with any particular religion. So this Creator created the entire world of form out of its own being. And then, where did we come from? Well, we are extensions of the Creator's being, the Creator's consciousness. But why did the Creator create us? Well, in one way, in order to co-create the world, because the Creator isn't creating every detail of the world. As I explained in that video, there are several levels of the world that are created by beings, and we are at the lowest level, and then there are levels above us that are part of what I call the spiritual realm, and there are many, many beings, self-aware beings in these levels, and they are all part of co-creating the process. Another reason is that the Creator, through us, is experiencing its own creation from the inside. But in the long run, the real purpose of our world of form is that it's an educational institution designed to raise an individual being from this very point-like, localized sense of self to the same all-encompassing sense of self that the Creator has. In other words, it's a Creator school. It's a school for creators, is what it is. And this is what Eastern philosophy in general, and especially neo-advaita, advaita, non-duality, this is what they deny. They not only ignore it, they deny it. Because they have got themselves trapped by this, anything that's differentiated is an illusion. So therefore, there can't be any purpose to life. There can't be any purpose to existence. Nothing matters. And again, what kind of antidepressants are you on? Because you can't live a fulfilled, constructive life with this attitude. So, what I'm saying is this. Inside the reality simulator, we are allowed to create any experience we want. And if we can imagine the experience where nothing in differentiation is real, any sense of self we have can only be a separate sense of self. And outside of that separate sense of self, there is only undifferentiated infinite awareness. If you can imagine having that experience, you are allowed to have that experience. And your mind can create this theory, this image, you can project it into the simulator. And the simulator will give you back an experience that seems absolutely real to you. And that's why I agree with the questioner that I think some of these non-dual people, or no-self people, they are dissociated. Now, you could say, of course, that everybody in the simulator is dissociated from reality because reality is only found outside the simulator, yes. But they are dissociated in a more extreme way because they are actually saying nothing is real. There is no reality. As soon as you have differentiation into different forms, you have duality. As soon as you have differentiations into individual beings, you have duality. And what I'm saying is, yes, there is a separate self. Yes, this is what gives us the immersion experience in the reality simulator. And yes, it is a goal for all of us who are serious about growth to overcome that separate self. But what is it that can overcome the separate self? It's the individual self that is a gift from God, the greatest gift we have received from the Creator, an extension of the Creator's own being. And that individual self is not going to be dissolved or eradicated when we awaken or become enlightened. It's going to gradually ascend, and then it can continue growing through many levels of the ascended realm, the spiritual realm, until it reaches the greater consciousness. And that's the purpose of life. And so, to me, that's reality. Now, I know very well that at least some of these non-dual teachers would probably say, well, Kim, you just explained it. You are just creating this experience that you are having inside the reality simulator. And your experience happens to be wrong, but mine is right. And so there's no way out of this. And that's what I've said in several videos. In the reality simulator, there is plausible deniability and plausible plausibility. When you have decided on a worldview, you can find arguments that will seemingly nullify everything that questions it. And you can find arguments that will seem to validate it. And that's why people have this experience that this is not a worldview, this is reality. And I have no interest whatsoever in debating with people about this, because at this level, you can never... I thought when I was young, I thought I would be able to come up with some ultimate argument, but I have realized that there is no ultimate argument. When people are in duality, they're reasoning at that level. You can't come up with an argument that will convince them. So all I'm saying is, I'm not saying that I have the only reality. I'm just saying that over the 48 years I've been on the spiritual path, I've had a lot of experiences of something outside my own mind. And I have come to the conclusion and the full acceptance that my outer mind has some very severe limitations. It is not able to understand reality. It's not able to define it. So my desire in life is to connect to a reality outside of my own mind. And that reality is for me outside the reality simulator. But the way I see it is also, it's in the spiritual realm. Now, I explained in some of my videos that there are 4 levels of the material universe: the purely physical, the emotional, mental, and identity. I also explained that there are beings in these levels, that some of them have a higher awareness than most people on Earth. And there are some people that connect to them. They have channelings from beings in the mental realm, for example. And this is part of the reality simulator, because these beings are inside the simulator. So they are simply facilitating that people will have certain experiences that they feel are absolutely real. And that's why there are these, in the higher mental realm, in the lower identity realm, there are these, a state of nothingness, a state of no self. And I'm not questioning that it's there. And that people have had experiences that felt very real to them of no self. But I'm saying this is a condition defined inside the simulator. And what I and many, many other people, millions of people throughout the ages, genuine mystics, have done is connected to something outside the simulator. And for me, it's very clear. I mean, my experience has been that there are beings outside the simulator. They were the beings who created the simulator and defined the parameters for how simulator terror works. And this is another, this requires you to again understand what I said. What is the purpose of creation? It is to that the Creator sends individual extensions of itself into a world that has form. And by interacting with that world of form, we are expanding our sense of self. Not the separate self. This is just an option. It's a blind alley we can go into. But we are expanding our individual sense of self until we reach that Creator consciousness. And we are not the first beings created that way. There are, as I explained in my video about how the world was created, innumerable beings in previous spheres over a very, very long time span, and they have reached a much higher level of consciousness than we have. And throughout the ages, you can see that mystics have connected to them. They have called them various things. Called them angels, they've called them gods, even though many of what they call gods are actually in the mental realm. But the latest thing that they have, the name is Ascended Masters. Within the last 100 years or so, these beings have presented themselves to us as Ascended Masters. And that's the kind of explanation or image of them that I have come to accept over the years and that I find very constructive and fruitful. So what I'm saying is, you have to grasp one simple thing. There is a certain ultimate reality in our world, which is the Creator. But the Creator is not an impersonal, undifferentiated state of consciousness. The Creator is an individual being. And between the Creator, which started our world of form, and us, there are many, many layers of individual beings. And those that have ascended from our world of, our universe here, our sphere, they have a higher level of consciousness than we have. And some of them have chosen to stay with us to help us reach a higher level of consciousness, to help us ascend. And to me, that's a fruitful worldview, because you can actually experience that these beings are there and they are real. They are much more real than what you experience inside the simulator. And I know, again, precisely what people in the non-dual community would probably say. They'll say, well, you've just defined it, Kim. You are just having another experience. What you call Ascended Masters and what you claim to have experienced these Ascended Masters, that's just another experience. And it's, again, I don't have any argument to prove anything, and I'm not actually seeking to prove anything, because what is it to me that you are having a different life experience than I'm having? What is it to me that you feel your life experience is completely real and mine is completely unreal? What is that to me? I can only follow growth, a growth path, the way I have experienced it, the way I see it. And in the end, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Will we ascend or not? But what I will say, just as a kind of funny remark, is that these non-dualists who are saying, I exist only as a separate self. And when the physical body dies, that separate self dissolves back into infinite awareness. These people will never have proof that they're right. They can't have. Because if they are right and there's only a separate self and infinite awareness, then the separate self is dissolved completely There is no self then. So there is therefore no self that can experience, oh yeah, I was right. I am actually dissolved. I cease to exist. You can't experience that you don't exist. You can only experience that you exist as a self. And that's why I'm saying, I am in total agreement. We need to overcome the separate self. And we can come to a point where we do overcome the separate self, and we are, whatever you want to call it, awakened, enlightened, whatever. But that's really just the starting point of our journey towards higher senses of self. Because that's when we realize we are not the separate self, but we are an individual self, and we have the potential to grow towards higher levels of consciousness. And that you can experience. You can leave the physical body behind. You can experience that you ascend to a higher realm. That you don't need the physical body, you're not coming back into a physical body. You are now at a higher level of consciousness than you ever were when you were on Earth. That you can experience. And that's why I'm saying, for me, that's how I see it. You can argue against it, you can disagree with it, and that's fine. But all I'm saying is, we all have the potential, as I explained, the real core of our beings here is the conscious self. And the conscious self can step outside the outer mind, and we can connect to our higher self, and we can experience our higher self, we can experience the Ascended Masters. And, if you haven't experienced an Ascended Master, you can of course argue against it. You can argue against the existence of Ascended Masters. I have no problem with that. But to me, it's like, I've always been reluctant to deny something I haven't experienced, and always been waiting to let me have the experience and then see. And I've always also been aware for many years how my outer mind will take even a mystical experience and try to twist it into validating its worldview, which I did for the first many years I was on the spiritual path. So it took me a while to get to a point where I could be more neutral. And it's when you really are neutral, you're not trying to superimpose any interpretation on it. That's when you will have more of these mystical experiences, and you can then use them to raise your consciousness, to question your outer view, instead of trying to let your ego use them to validate your outer view. So that's another question you can have. You can look at people and you can say, okay, how attached are people to the worldview they have? For example, in neo-advaita or non-duality, radical non-dualists, how attached are people to it? Are they only looking for what validates their worldview? Or are they open to having an experience that totally questions their worldview? And I have been on this path for 48 years, where for most of that path, the beginning, probably 30 years, I had certain world views that I was very attached to, very reluctant to question. But really, when I started being more neutral, being willing to question it, my growth accelerated tremendously. And so that's what I would say to people, who are open to watching this and who watch this very long video to the end, The real question is not where you are at in consciousness. The real question is, how willing are you to question your present worldview and experience that there's something beyond it? Because as the Ascended Masters say, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Ask and you shall receive. If you ask with a neutral state of mind, if you ask with a biased state of mind that only wants confirmation, then you can't get a clear experience. Because again, the reality simulator. If you are asking the Ascended Masters who are outside the simulator to validate a viewpoint you have created inside the simulator, they will not respond, because that would only get you more trapped in the simulator. So you have to come to this point where you are neutral, and you are saying, okay, I want to experience what it's like to be outside, what it's like outside the simulator. And I don't want to use it to validate the worldview I have from inside the simulator. I really just want the experience. And if you can be neutral, you will have that experience. I've had it, many other people have had it. But it really is only a question of how neutral are you able to be, because the Ascended Masters, that's what they're there for, to help us get that frame of reference, to question the reality of the simulator. And the more willing you are to question your sense of reality, the more you will experience that the Ascended Masters are there to help you accomplish that and raise your consciousness. So that's my perspective. And I hope it's useful to somebody. It certainly has been extremely useful to me over the last many years.